Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with chicken apple sausage and biscuits and gravy. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make your very own homemade chicken apple sausage, which you'll then hopefully place on some homemade buttermilk biscuits, and then top with one of the most delicious pan sauces ever invented. And by the way, the ultimate compliment for a chicken apple sausage is that it doesn't taste like chicken. And we are going to cheat a little bit to achieve that goal. But that's okay. Cooking is one of the few things where cheating is acceptable and very much encouraged. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by cutting up some boneless, skinless chicken thighs into like 1-inch pieces. And yes, you breast people can use those if you want. But because thighs are more flavorful and have more connective tissue and fat, they definitely work better here, or at least I think so. So what we'll do is go ahead and cut those into strips, and then across into like 1-inch pieces. And in case you're wondering, that's about 1.5 pounds. And then to that, we're going to add one technically optional ingredient, which I would consider mandatory. And that would be 3 or 4 ounces of pancetta, which is a cured pork very similar to bacon, except it's not smoked. And unlike the chicken, what we're going to do here is chop this very, very finely. So we'll give it a rough cut first, and then we'll work that over with our cleaver or another large knife until it's almost but not quite a paste. And when I mentioned cheating earlier, this is one of the main things I was talking about. All right, this stuff's going to add a tremendous amount of moisture and flavor, and it is going to significantly improve the texture of our sausage. And then what we're going to do once that's been pretty much pulverized is go ahead and add that to our chicken thigh. And then we'll go ahead and give that a quick mix to make sure it's distributed evenly. And yes, if you want to, you can totally use bacon. It will have the same effect on the texture, but not surprisingly, your final product will taste like bacon, which is why I prefer the pancetta. But anyway, of course, that's up to you. I mean, you guys are, after all, the caddies of your chicken apple sausage patties. But either way, we'll go ahead and mix that in, at which point we can proceed to the seasoning. And that'll begin with some kosher salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. We'll also add a little bit of dry thyme and a few crushed fennel seeds. And you do get extra credit if you toast them first. And then we'll also do a little bit of ground coriander. And of course, a little touch of cayenne, as well as some freshly grated nutmeg. And then last but not least, a little bit of fresh sage. Okay, just a few leaves that we sliced and cut really finely. And then what we're going to want to do is give that a mix before transferring that onto a plate. Because what we're going to do before we grind this is cover that and pop it in the freezer for about 15 or 20 minutes until it's basically about half frozen. And that's another trick that's really going to improve the texture. Okay, if we process that meat when it's too warm, it's going to get pasty and be kind of rubbery and tough in the final product. So we'll go ahead and cover that and pop it in the freezer and move on to the last major ingredient, our apples, which to prep we're going to want to peel and quarter. And as you can see, I'm using some Granny Smith. You may remember that variety from such videos as apple butter. And then what we'll do once our apple's been peeled and quartered is go ahead and grate it on a very sharp grater. And how you can tell whether your grater's sharp or dull is if your apples turn brown like a second after you do this, your grater's too dull. But if your grater's in pretty good shape, or should I say great shape, this stuff should not be turning brown right away. And if yours do start to discolor, do not worry, because we're going to mix this into the meat pretty soon. And please be careful. These pieces of apple can be slippery, and you don't want to take off a piece of knuckle, which is a very real possibility. So please do this thoughtfully. So I went ahead and grated 2 relatively small apples, at which point we'll transfer that onto a couple paper towels and squeeze out all the juice, or as much as we can. And yes, you're definitely going to want to drink that stuff. I'm guessing that's going to be the freshest apple juice you've ever enjoyed. And then what we'll do once our shredded apple's prepped is pull our now partially frozen meat out of the freezer, and we'll transfer our shredded apple on top, and then divide that into 2 portions. Because we're about to grind this in our food processor, and you do not want to do too much at once. So we'll go ahead and transfer half in, and by making sure our meat is really, really cold, and by not doing too much at once, we're going to be able to pulse this on and off to create a nice coarse grind that is not going to get all tough and chewy when we cook this. So like I said, we'll go ahead and pulse that on and off until it's as coarse or as fine as we want. And right here, I'm going to show you about how far I like to go. All right, maybe just a little bit finer than a coarse sausage grind, but not nearly as fine as what they sell as ground chicken in the store. So yes, this recipe would be easier if you just bought ground chicken. But unfortunately, they grind that to a paste, and it really does not have a very nice texture. So sure, this technique's a little more work, but the results are infinitely better. And then once that's ground, we'll transfer it into a bowl. And unless we're totally starving, we'll go ahead and cover that and refrigerate it from anywhere between 4 hours and overnight. And that's going to give those flavors time to develop. So I let mine sit in the fridge for about 4 hours, at which point we'll go ahead and form our patties. And you can just eye this, but I like to use a large ice cream scoop so I can get these to a nice consistent size. And as usual, anytime we're forming ground meat, dampening your hands and fingers with a little bit of cold water helps things not stick. And you should be able to form some nice uniform patties. And I don't think we want to make these too thin. Okay, I usually shoot for about 3/4 of an inch thick. And ideally, these are going to be about the same size as the biscuits we're going to serve them on. And yes, of course, if you have the casings, you can also make links. But obviously, the patties work better for biscuits and gravy. And then once our patties have been formed, they're ready to fry, which I'm going to do over medium-high heat, and just a little touch of olive oil. And since I'm home alone, I'm just going to do 1 portion. Oh, and by the way, make sure you go find our buttermilk biscuit recipe and make up a batch of those for this. So yes, we're going to be multitasking here, baking biscuits and frying sausage. But anyway, we'll give that first side about 5 minutes, which because chicken is so sticky, we don't want to touch until we're ready to turn them. Okay, we really want to let those form a beautiful crust before we flip them over. And because of the sugar in the apples, you should get a really beautiful dark fond. Okay, somewhere between a dark brown and a golden black. But don't worry, that's a good thing. And not only is that not going to taste bad, it's going to make our gravy taste even better. Not to mention look even better. And then what we're going to do as soon as we flip those over is reduce our heat to medium. And we'll toss in a nice chunk of butter, along with 2 sage leaves. And we are not adding this butter to help cook the sausage. All right, those patties are doing just fine. But we do need that butter to make our roux, which eventually is going to turn into our pan gravy. And as far as our sage leaves go, yes, they are flavoring the butter, but we'll also use those to garnish our patties at the end. Because if you fry sage leaves, they actually turn crispy. And what we're going to want to do is watch those leaves and remove them from the pan when they stop bubbling. Okay, you see those bubbles? That's water coming out. And as soon as that stops, and they look a little something like this, we'll go ahead and remove those from the pan, and then continue on medium until our sausage is cooked, which is basically when it just starts to feel firm to the touch. Okay, if it feels mushy, it's raw. But when it firms up and springs back, you know you're probably done. And at that point, we will pull our patties and proceed to make the pan gravy. And to do that, we will whisk about a tablespoon of flour into our sage butter and pan drippings. And we'll cook that for just 1 minute before adding about a half a cup of chicken broth. And of course, as we do that, all that beautiful caramelized goodness is going to be released from the bottom and be infused into our sauce. And it should turn into one of the most beautiful colors you've ever seen. Which, by the way, is why we're not using a nonstick pan here. Okay, if that stuff does not caramelize onto the bottom of the pan, this is not happening. And then what we'll do once we've deglazed our pan is raise our heat to high, and we'll bring this up to a boil. And while that's happening, we'll add the rest of the ingredients, which includes a little touch of maple syrup, just like a teaspoon or so, to sweeten this up a little bit. And we'll also at this point add a little bit of cream, or, in my case, creme fraiche. Okay, cream is fine. Creme fraiche is better. And yes, of course, we have a video on how to make that yourself. And if you've never actually had creme fraiche before, do yourself a favor and make a batch. But anyway, we'll go ahead and stir that in. And I'm also going to season this up with a little bit of salt and freshly ground black pepper. And that is pretty much it for our pan gravy. We're simply going to cook that until it's as thick as we want, which for me was right here. Okay, as you can see here, I like mine pretty thick, but still spoonable. Oh yeah, it's got to be spoonable. And if yours goes too far, just add another splash of stock or broth. But anyway, once our pan gravy is done, we're ready for final assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and split one of our famous buttermilk biscuits and place that next to a nice arugula and apple salad, which should pair perfectly with our sausage. And we'll place down our patties and spoon over plenty of that gorgeous gravy. And then for a final and very beautiful touch, we'll go ahead and garnish with our crispy fried sage leaves. And that's it. Our homemade chicken apple sausage and biscuits and gravy is ready to enjoy. And man, did I enjoy this. That, my friends, was one of the most delicious things I've eaten in a long time. And because we followed a few simple techniques and ground our own chicken, we have a beautifully moist and tender texture that was so sausage-like. If you didn't tell someone, they probably would not know you used chicken for this. Okay, that is how juicy and flavorful this was. So yes, a little bit of extra work, but totally worth it. So I could not have been happier with how this came out. Although I did decide I should spoon on the rest of the gravy, because if you are making one serving of something, you're going to want to serve it at once. So I went ahead and spooned over the rest, and I continued on experiencing the magic that is homemade sausage on homemade biscuit with homemade gravy. Oh, and one last thing to mention before we sign off here. You actually don't have to make links or patties. You can, if you want, just toss that sausage meat into the pan and crumble it up as you cook it and make what we call in the business a country gravy. So that's another way to go if you want. And I will give you a little more info about how to do that in the blog post. But no matter what form it eventually takes, I really do hope you give this amazing chicken apple sausage a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy